Good afternoon. This is Fonte, crypto. So, the reason I created this video was to discuss, is Bitcoin a grift, right? And I know before you think I've lost my mind or I've gone crazy. I don't really want to spend too much time actually entertaining this discussion. Um, I'm more just suggesting this as a rhetoric. Um, do I believe Bitcoin is a grift? I really have mixed views on that. But there's this strong notion in crypto that people have bought that Bitcoin could never collapse. Bitcoin can never go back to zero. And I think that is fundamentally incorrect. It is theoretically possible. It's more than within the realm of possibility for Bitcoin to fall back to zero. I'm not saying that will happen, but the same institutional unit that has been manipulating Bitcoin for 16 years now, right? That pumped Bitcoin to $100,000 could have it reverse and go back to $0, right? And I know a lot of people are thinking there's no institutional unit manipulating Bitcoin, really. And that's what I thought. I thought Bitcoin was entirely retail driven when I first bought Bitcoin back in 2017. Most people believe that, if you look at Bitcoin's chart, this is it's currently $77,000. This is not 1 million% return. It's not 10 million% return. This is 125 million% return. And if you look at Bitcoin's history, right, you go back to the earliest dates, Bitcoin's has had this very similar chart within each cycle. In the 2011 cycle, when it pumped to $32, went right back down to $2. Everybody was scared and thought it was going back, going to zero back then. And I have no reason to blame people. That was the very infant stage of Bitcoin. Nobody, if you told these people that bought Bitcoin at $5 that Bitcoin would hit $100,000 one day, nobody would believe it because it would take $1 trillion in money, even though Bitcoin in its earliest stage was $6 million. Um, I mean, the earliest price of Bitcoin was 0.0099. Coin Market Cap claims that the earliest price of Bitcoin is 0.06183. But yeah, Bitcoin was definitely less than that. The New Liberty Standard Exchange priced it at 0.0009 Bitcoin in January 2009. I know everybody wishes they had bought back then, even though it was incredibly infant and anything could have happened to it. This was before even the institutional unit, which I will discuss, purchased Bitcoin, right? So, who is this institutional unit that's been manipulating crypto, Bitcoin, for 16 years, right? Strongly believe it's China. It's always been China, right? As soon as they discovered Bitcoin, um, it is these four major Chinese banks. It is state-owned banks of the Communist Republic of China, the Industrial Communist Commercial Bank of China, the largest bank in China, the China Construction Bank, Agricultural Bank of China, right? And collectively they have $20 trillion in assets. Do I believe that they're strictly using bank money, customer money to manipulate Bitcoin? They don't have to. China can just print money, right? But they're using these banks to pump the crypto market, right? I mean, even the Ripple CEO, Brad Garlinghouse, right? And they have more information than I do. Uh, had frequently alleged that Bitcoin is under Chinese control, arguing that over 50% of its mining occurs there, which he believes poses a risk of manipulation. He argued this centralized control makes it a risk for Western adoption. I don't believe that, but and claims U.S. regulations mistakenly favor these Chinese controlled technologies. Right. So you have an institution that completely controls the supply. They don't control supply. Supply is limited at 21 million, but they own the vast majority of Bitcoin, over 50% of Bitcoin, and they have control over mining. Right. They control over 50% of the network. I mean, why wouldn't you believe that Bit and that the whole crypto market is, and particularly Bitcoin, manipulated by these, state-owned Chinese banks, right? And if you look even like at the charts, right? You look at vast majority of cryptos, they all have the same price charts. As they when they dump, they all dump on the same day. When they pump, I mean, their week charts look exactly the same. They all dump on the same day. They all pump on the same day. That's not a coincidence. That's not retail that's occurring, right? When you see these coincidences, it's not a coincidence, right? There's tremendous manipulation in cryptocurrency by this institutional unit. I emphasize institutional unit, not to confuse with various institutions, because I believe it's one unit that's manipulating crypto as a whole, right? So here's the primary reasons for potential Bitcoin collapse for you know from various credible sources, right? And I don't really agree with many of these reasons. I think if Bitcoin does collapse, it'll be for alternative reasons. But the first is lack of intrinsic value, right? And I've heard this argument so many times that I don't particularly like it. Bitcoin has no underlying product, service. I think Warren Buffett called it rat poison. And I don't agree with any of this. Bitcoin is a technology. Blockchain is a technology, and I believe there is tremendous value in this technology. I don't believe Bitcoin will be around forever, but I believe blockchain, or at least digital currency, will be the future, right? Um, Contagion of regulatory risk. Now, this, I mean, regulatory regulations change all the time. Increased integration into traditional finance via ETS, blah blah blah. Stricter regulation, government crackdown. Yeah, I don't also agree with this reason, because I think depending on the administration you have, depending on who's running each country, the laws change all the time. And right now with China, China has currently banned Bitcoin, right? People, China banned Bitcoin. It's been banned in China for the majority of public, mainland residents. It's illegal. And they say, oh, we're trying to fight, money laundering and terrorism and, illegal transactions and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, um, it takes up so much energy consumption. We care about we China, we care about the world and air pollution and blah blah. They don't care about any of this stuff. I mean, Beijing is like number one polluted city in the world. This is just for them trying to make themselves pure vanity, make themselves look good. Um, I will give you my reasons why I believe that Bitcoin continues to be banned in China, even though it is same hand hypocritically manipulated by China, right? High volatility and leverage. This is another technical finance reason why Bitcoin could collapse. Yeah, there's always volatility in crypto because it's heavily manipulated, but I don't believe that's the reason why it will collapse one day either. Or why it's a grift. Macroeconomic pressures. Again, like I don't like any of these reasons, but if you Google, uh, literally put this in Google, or ChatGPT, whatever, they will tell you like these are the common reasons why they believe you know that macroeconomic pressures. You hear the same technical reasons, technological and security threats. Okay, but I can agree with this. Potential vulnerabilities to future quantum computing. Yeah, quantum computing would absolutely destroy cryptocurrency and just the crypto technology, cryptography, right? 51% tax, technical flaws, but we are far away from, you know, quantum computing taking effect. And maybe I'm wrong on that, but we're a very long time. Uh, I believe Bitcoin will stay until at least 2040 when the final Bitcoin is mined, giving it good 15 years. And maybe around that year, that's when Bitcoin hits $1 million. But I don't see the security threat anywhere near yet. I mean, Bitcoin is very outdated technology, right? 2009 and today, that's the equivalent to the original iPhone. And we're in 2026 where we have the iPhone 17 Pro Max. And you can't tell me that the original iPhone is superior to the iPhone 17 Pro Max. 17 years of technology. Right? It's just the same thing with movies, right? Computer graphic imagery today is significantly more advanced than something you see in the 80s in RoboCop or whatever. Great movie. The technology was, ahead of its time, whatever, but it just paled in comparison to today's time because technology is always improving. And then finally, the environmental concerns. high energy consumption of Bitcoin mining as a primary reason. I hate this reason. This is nonsense. This is bullshit. Okay. And this is the Elon Musk reason why he bought Bitcoin, $2 billion worth of Bitcoin in 2021, and then immediately sold it. I don't even know if he really actually bought Bitcoin. You have to look at what Elon Musk's mind is at the time. Buying, he did buy Bitcoin. He claimed he bought it. Tesla purchased $1.5 billion Bitcoin to diversify and maximize returns on cash, causing him. And I remember this, and it was a great day for crypto. But he immediately sold that Bitcoin, claiming that it's just a waste of energy and it was just nonsense, right? He really had no serious interest in Bitcoin, right? And moving on, I will tell you my reasons, right? I kept it really short, right? Of why I think Bitcoin will collapse one day. Um, the primary reason, well, there's a couple. Uh, Faith is lost, right? The institutional unit manipulating Bitcoin no longer finds value in, the current Bitcoin price to get bored of Bitcoin, whatever the reason is, right? I mean, MicroStrategy continues to buy Bitcoin, right? I don't know why they keep buying Bitcoin. I mean, Michael Saylor is a billionaire. He doesn't need Bitcoin, right? They claim to have like 815,000 Bitcoin today worth $60 billion, right? If you're already rich, my advice is you don't need to be richer, right? The only thing that can happen when you're as wealthy as somebody like Michael Saylor is that you lose your money and go from becoming a billionaire to a millionaire, right? And I think nobody should invest in MicroStrategy. I think it's a horrible investment because it's very much having his faith on Bitcoin. Whatever happens to Bitcoin, if Bitcoin collapses, so does MicroStrategy, and it's a gamble, right? So I think you have to be really careful with, I mean, what is faith, right? The only reason a lot of fiat currencies exist is because of faith. The United States dollars today, a lot of Americans don't know what the US currency is backed by. It's not backed by any commodity, right? US currency is backed by one word, faith, right? By the full faith and credit of the United States government. And that's why anybody who has fiat currency in US dollar should be afraid because, I mean, we saw the Venezuelan bolivar, what happened to that, right? It completely collapsed overnight. And Venezuelan millionaires lost all their money because they believed in their bolivar currency. And that's a second world country. If that can happen to Venezuela, can't that happen to America? I mean, one of the biggest mistakes I think America made was getting off of, commodities. I believe, you know, uh, U.S. currency used to be backed by oil or something like that, right? During Nixon is when it would change, right? It used to be backed by physical commodity, and then they wanted to have more money for war or whatever, so they just initially lifted the U.S. dollar and just it's backed by the full faith and credit of U.S. citizens. So if we 400 million plus population lose faith in the U.S. currency, then the U.S. currency could collapse very much in play. I don't think that will happen, but I see Bitcoin collapsing before the US dollar, but I could be wrong, right? But you can't have your total faith in fiat currency either, right? And if the institutional unit, the people who have put, this $1.5 trillion, $1.54 trillion in Bitcoin, if they lose faith in Bitcoin, then it could collapse. They could essentially drop Bitcoin from 77,000 to less than $1,000 overnight, right? I don't like to say Bitcoin will go to zero because that sounds super cliche, right? There's a better chance that it falls to $100 or less than that, but I don't think it could ever like possibly fall to exactly $0. But they have the ability to manipulate Bitcoin. I mean, they're the one that's pumped it up to this level, right? So they can just as well dump it down. And a lot of people say, well, there's been a lot of retail investment and people. There's a reason why there aren't that many Bitcoin millionaires, right? Because most people buy Bitcoin after the cycle. People buy Bitcoin, right? I mean, this is the 2011 cycle, but I know plenty of people who bought Bitcoin as it was coming down. Nobody was buying it here. They buy it around here and they panic and they sell. Same thing in the next cycle, right? I had a friend who bought Bitcoin at $1,000. He had $75,000. He bought $1,000 worth of Bitcoin, and so he owned 75 Bitcoins. And that was his. He was set, in the 70s, and he was panicking because it's supposed to be his retirement income, and he just watched Bitcoin. Just he eventually lost hope and sold Bitcoin around here, and lost the vast majority of his investment. Right? Yeah, I know people can say, but if he had just hodled for 4 years, it would have recovered. That's true, but this was the first time you've seen Bitcoin go dormant for that long. Like in the 2013 cycle, I mean, we the first pump was 2011, then 2013, and then went 4 years of dormancy, and just you had to wait until 2018, you know, like December 2016, just to see that $1,000 again, right? We had never witnessed that long of a period. That was the first time it started following the 4 year cycle, right? The vast majority of people buy Bitcoin, during the pump or after the pump, right? And that's why, and this is why the Bitcoin grift works so effectively, right? Because when you see the mania, and it's very similar to the tulip mania, right, of the 1500s, tulip mania, right, where these useless tulips, right, this was during the Dutch Golden Age, where prices in tulips just absolutely soared. I mean, this is just a flowers plant, right? Why would something like this have this meteoric rise, like for no reason, right? And that's what happens with human and just human nature and people believing in value in certain things. Anything can suddenly pump. I remember the Tickle Me Elmo toy, right? And I was a kid back then, right? And I remember I wanted this toy in around 96, right? And like it went from $27 to $1,000, right? In 1996. A little there's nothing amazing about this stupid toy, right? All it does is it laughs. Today you can buy it for a normal price, but back in 1996, I mean, everybody wanted it for Christmas for some reason. It was a huge fad, and it went from $28 to $1,000, right? This is what happens with human nature and people when they get really excited about something. Any ridiculous thing. I think Tickle Me Elmo is absolutely ridiculous. I think tulips are absolutely ridiculous. I think Bitcoin is for real. I mean, I think it's great technology. Blockchain is here to stay for sure. I don't know about Bitcoin. Bitcoin is definitely outdated technology. I'm not a huge fan of where Bitcoin is today. And now we can talk about the second topic, which Bitcoin's technology is very old, equivalent to the original iPhone released in 2009, right? Um, and I have many reasons for why I believe this. So, you know, um, and this is the common iPhone analogy, right? The argument is that Bitcoin technology is very old, right? It's 16 years old, right? Newer, faster, and more efficient cryptocurrencies will inevitably replace it. We believe that for a very long time. And what is your definition of replace, right? If you look at the crypto Bitcoin dominance, um, click on market cap, Bitcoin dominance. I mean, Bitcoin continues to dominate at 60%, Ethereum at 10%, and everything else 30%, right? In 2026. But in 2017, people, back in June 18th, right? June 18th, people believed that that Ethereum would surpass Bitcoin in market cap, because this was the probably the closest we've ever seen. Ethereum at 31%, and the margin was even closer than that. Bitcoin at 37%. There was huge. Ethereum had a crowd sale in 2014 where everyone bought Ethereum, and people really believed in this altcoin season, 2017, the greatest altcoin season we ever had, that Ethereum would, inevitably surpass Bitcoin because Ethereum was better technology. Smart contracts, that was the big niche that we saw in 2017. And that was the closest we've ever had in crypto history to an altcoin nearly surpassing Bitcoin in market cap, right? And then as you see, as we move into the future, like today, Ethereum stands at 10%, and it just keeps trailing Bitcoin further. Bitcoin's at 59%. So yeah, there's always been this hysteria that there would be newer technologies, cryptocurrencies. Even I mean, there are many cryptocurrencies like Solana. You could even say Cardano can process more transactions than Bitcoin. Um, Bitcoin was created in 2009 with a proof of work mechanism, and the comparison holds true, regarding its original inception date and role as a foundational innovation. But that's a 2009 innovation, right? We're in 2026. What if you wanted to compare, Bitcoin versus like something everyday people use, which like Visa, right? Visa significantly processes more transactions than Bitcoin, right? You can see that Bitcoin, Visa processes an average of 1,700 to 24,000 transactions per second, while Bitcoin is limited to roughly 717 7 TPS due to its decentralized secure blockchain design. So let's talk about ETH, right? Um, this is another argument against Bitcoin's technology, right? So Bitcoin has fairly higher fees. The ETH supposed to be that solution, but ETH has what we know as gas model, right? And this ETH gas model, the fees are. I've purchased ETH and I get frustrated with those gas models that really benefit the validator. But they're essential as part of ETH's gas model, where gas fees are split. The base fees burn permanently destroy. It reduces each supply, while the priority fee it goes to the validators, the people, the miners, for ensuring a fast transaction speed, and it serves as compensation for their computational work. It's great for the miners. It sucks for the user, right? To have to pay gas fees. That's not a solution because what do you have to pay with Visa, right? There are no fees in Visa, or the fees are negligible, right? So between the number of transactions Bitcoins can process and the amount of fees, it's not, a viable technology that everyday people can use, right? There's no way that Bitcoin could serve the entire U.S. world population as a medium of exchange, right? The next argument about, against Bitcoin's technology is, the high energy consumption, right? So the blockchain consensus model, which uses proof of work, right? Um, that does require a high consumption of energy, right? 150 to 200 terawatt hours, right? This is not practical, right? Unlike newer proof of stake systems like Cardano or ETH 2.0 that are cleaner and more efficient, this proof of work that Bitcoin uses, right, it requires immense computational power. The proof of stake is widely considered the best modern blockchain today. Other people will dispute that, but best is really open for debate. Some people consider maximum decentralization that we see in Bitcoin, or proof of authority, which is best for private high speed applications. Um, but this energy consumption is a real serious issue for Bitcoin, and that's not going to change anytime soon, right? The network's carbon footprint is estimated at 114 million metric tons of carbon dioxide compared to the annual emissions of Secco, right? And most people don't even use Bitcoin as a transaction, right? They're not using it as a medium of exchange. People just buy Bitcoin and hold it to hope that they can make money as an investment. Bitcoin, the purpose of why Bitcoin was initially created was for a medium of exchange. People forget that, right? And today it's entirely as a vehicle. It's used as a vehicle, as an investment vehicle, right? I buy Bitcoin at a certain price and then I plan on selling it later, right? Never plan on using it for any transaction whatsoever, which makes it a scary thing, right? What is its purpose? Um, and then the lack of native functionality, right? Bitcoin, lack of native. What does that mean? Functionality, right? So, I mean, this is mostly talking about it lacks the built-in, you know, smart contract capabilities or decentralized finance that newer chains like Ethereum offer natively. Um, and this is my argument about like, so how do you define what's the best, crypto investment, or what is the best tech in crypto? Because I can tell you that Bitcoin Cash alone is better tech than Bitcoin, right? Even though it's a fraction market cap, it is better tech because it's a newer technology. Its block size is, I believe, 4 times as big, right? It has a larger block size. It's all around a better tech than Bitcoin, right? I don't think anybody would dispute that, right? I mean, and yet Bitcoin Cash remains, and Bitcoin Cash was a fork of Bitcoin. Um, Increased its block size. I believe Bitcoin's block size was, um, it maintains a 1 megabyte limit. And Bitcoin Cash supported much larger block size, 32 megabytes. Um, but yeah, Bitcoin Cash was a fork to solve problems with the network, and yet people forgotten about Bitcoin Cash. Um, Bitcoin Cash is better tech, yet I mean, does tech matter in crypto? Because if that was the case, Bitcoin Cash would have market cap, a higher market cap. It's all about the tech, and that's why I don't believe it's about the tech. Ultimately, what matters the most to the whales in crypto is what they trust the most and what will make them the most amount of money. Because there's no way today that the iPhone 1 would have more value than the iPhone 17 Pro Max, right? The iPhone 17 Pro Max is like $2,000 something, and the original iPhone is pretty much worthless unless you're using it as an antique and hoping to sell it later, pretty much as an investment. Um, and now there's counter arguments, that Bitcoin technology has evolved the network effect, right? We talk about Bitcoin upgrades. And I know I'm getting away from my topic, which Bitcoin's drift, but I will conclude with that later because I really don't want to focus too much on that. As talk more about, you know, um, some of these, upgrades, evolution. Um, People will make the argument Bitcoin is not stagnant. It has underwent major updates, such as SegWit in 2017, a landmark soft fork, and Taproot, right, in 2021. Most people don't know what this is, don't care about what it is. They just, if it can help them make money investing in Bitcoin, that's all they care about, right? But you should educate yourself on this stuff because it does matter, right? Even though right now looks like it has no effect on Bitcoin's price, um, Taproot added smart contract flexibility and privacy enhancements, right? Solve speed issues. What did Bitcoin do? Right? Bitcoin uses the Network. Lightning Network, right? That's a layer two. Bitcoin is the layer one, right? How, maybe it's not the best example, is, I mean, what do you think of a pig lipstick on a pig, right? Um, is this a beautiful woman to you, right? Is this an attractive woman, right? The layer one is the pig, and the layer two is the lipstick. No, I would rather be with a woman with no lipstick, the beautiful layer one, than with a pig with lipstick, right? That's what this whole layer two thing is, right? Um, yeah, the layer two is great. You're using a lightning work on a shitty, outdated technology like Bitcoin, but it's still bad tech, right? The Lightning Network, a layer two solution is supposed to is allows for near instant low fee transactions. Okay, yeah, Bitcoin has possibly lower fees than Ethereum, but it's still incredibly slow, right? It's just not practical for daily use compared to something like Visa, right? But what about Ethereum? Is Ethereum a good great layer one, right? And Ethereum is also considered a bad layer one for users because it has high fees and congestion. During peak usage, gas fees become prohibitively expensive. I discussed this earlier about gas fees. I've never been a fan of gas fees. They suck for users, especially people who have less money or smaller transactions. Ethereum has low throughput. Layer one only handles 7 to 30 transactions per second, which is slow compared to competitors, and it failed to scale on chain. And some critics will argue that abandoning direct layer one and scaling in favor of layer twos is a mistake, making the base layer unusable for daily transaction. Right? I strongly believe that the layer one technology has to be, you know, is what matters the most, right? You can put lipstick on a pig, but the pig is still a pig. Uh, and then talk about proven security and decentral. This is where a lot of people say that Bitcoin really shines, right? It's the oldest and most decentralized cryptocurrency, right? Meaning it's been well tested, right? It has the longest track record, uh, and Bitcoin security is unmatched. Well, until we get quantum computers, which will make every cryptocurrency worthless. Um, Newer technologies often sacrifice decentralization for speed. Okay, so let's talk about decentralizing Bitcoin. Is Bitcoin decentralized? I mean, do you believe that? Because most people who invest in crypto would believe that Bitcoin is decentralized. It's not decentralized, right? It's very centralized. It's owned by the Chinese bank, right? They manipulate the prices, they pump it on in whatever days they feel like it. If they see the U.S. stocks fall, they'll dump Bitcoin. It's very centralized. They have complete control of the cryptocurrency. So it's just a complete fallacy, in my opinion, to say, "Oh, where's your evidence? How do you prove that China's manipulating crypto?" Yeah, obviously I can't prove that, right? But if you believe that all these simultaneous charts in cryptocurrencies, that these all look the same week after week, day after day, and that there's no institutional unit manipulating all of crypto, then I have an edgex point to sell you, right? It's just very unpractical to believe that, right? Bitcoin's not decentralized, but it's decentralized compared to a lot of other various cryptos, right? What is your definition of decentralized, right? Um, no single entity can change its rules or control its network. Okay, that's great about the technology, but a single entity can manipulate its price. Decentralized blockchain ledger, no single entity control, peer-to-peer transaction, very influenced by BitTorrent, right? The BitTorrent software where you have peer-to-peer lending of software and files. That's where Bitcoin came from. The whole notion of it, open participation, anybody can join, leave mine. Yeah, we love the democracy in crypto, but anytime you have a limited supply, there will be some unit that controls the vast majority of Bitcoin, right? Which China jumped on the opportunity when they realized they could manipulate Bitcoin and make a lot of money for themselves, right? Uh, so why is my third argument? I talked enough about technology, I think, right? Bitcoin protocol was born in 2009. And they claim that the technology has evolved through layered solutions and protocol upgrades to solve scalability. Position itself as digital gold, a word I freaking hate. I can't whenever they call Bitcoin digital gold, even if you believe that. Only gold is gold, Bitcoin is Bitcoin. And it's not a fast daily payment. It's very slow, right? So I don't believe this technology. It's not used as a medium of exchange. If it was used like Visa, then you'd have me, but it's not. The technology is actually very irrelevant to even most of the modern blockchain technology. I mean, it's incredibly slow. It doesn't scale like Solana, Cardano, or Ethereum. It's probably the worst technology out of any of the top 10 cryptos, and yet it's number one because of its store of value, right? Uh, the China ban. Okay, so this is really important to me. I will never know why China banned Bitcoin. I mean, that's cool. Why did China ban Bitcoin? Right? China banned Bitcoin to maintain financial stability, prevent capital flight, reduce energy consumption from mining, and ensure government control over its monetary system. By cracking down on decentralized volatile cryptocurrencies, Beijing aimed to curtail illegal financial activities and protect the legitimacy of the yuan. Okay, this is the same Beijing which has some of the worst air pollution in the world, probably number one, right? Because China cares so much about the environment, right? They care about energy consumption. I mean, they're the most polluted city in the world. Like, don't ever visit Beijing; it's not healthy. And this is not anti-Chinese rant. This is just the reality, right? I've talked to many Chinese people who lived in China, and they told me about this. Like, you don't want to live in Beijing. You don't want to live in any incredibly populated city in China, right? Any urban city in China, you'll see the same problem with the environment. Um, Key motivations for Chinese ban: financial stability and risk management, blah, 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 BS, capital control. I mean, there's some sense to this. Like, yeah, China wants complete control of fiat currency, cryptocurrency, everything, right? Um, but they don't want the world to know that they are manipulating Bitcoin, that they pretty much own Bitcoin, right? Um, Preventing illegal activity. Okay, another nonsensical reason. Um, there's, I mean, plenty of gambling. What is that gambling hub of the world now? Is Macau? I believe it's called Macau. It's like rivals Vegas. Yeah, gambling in Macau. Like this, like a special administrative. There's a recent movie that came out. Um, yeah, China is cares so much about gambling, right? That they continue having like a hub that rivals almost Vegas. Currently, Macau has its revenue is greater than Vegas right now. I think I have to look into that, but um, a lot of these reasons, I don't believe any of these. This is any of the reasons as to why China banned Bitcoins today. I think the closest one is probably capital control or sovereignty and control. But I think my reasons there's two reasons that I've always believed that why China continues to ban Bitcoin. One is factor number one: they don't believe this as a long term investment. They believe they intend on collapsing Bitcoin one day. They don't want their losers, their people of China to invest in something that is just an experiment for them, right? And the second reason I believe is because they don't want their citizens to being empowered. You can't own anything in China. You know, can you really own anything in the United States? I mean, United States, you buy a property, you still got to pay property taxes, but it's not the same thing as ownership. China versus America, and like China, they can seize any property. They don't need an eminent domain like they need in the United States, and you don't own anything in China. Like you can never fully own your house. You can't own anything because the government owns everything, right? So I believe the second reason would be that China doesn't want their citizens to build any kind of wealth through Bitcoin or that could be a potential threat to the government, right? And coup d'état or overthrowing the government, the Republic of China. But yeah, until I see China, you know, will Bitcoin be legal in China ever, right? Will Bitcoin be legal in China, right? Uh, this is yet to see, right? I don't think it ever will be, right? Because this I don't believe that China has full confidence that's Bitcoin being a global currency. It's not something that they want their citizens to participate in because I believe in a way they're kind of protecting their citizens because it's an experiment, right? And if it goes to zero one day, right, close to zero, right? They don't want their people. They don't want the Republic of China to be impacted in any way. Um, until I see Bitcoin being legal in China, right? I mean, China is one of the largest countries in the world. Then I will always believe that Bitcoin is grift. And you can call me an idiot, this and that. And I don't even care if Bitcoin is a grift or not. I mean, that's very important. But, you know, um, there's a lot of reasons you should be very, um, you know, worried about Bitcoin. Now, do I think Bitcoin will collapse tomorrow? No. But, right, the amount of mass manipulation that you see with Bitcoin and, the technology being very old, right? A lot of things just don't make sense, right? Why is the Bitcoin dominance continue to go up when it's just the most outdated technology? Like in any other sector, this would make no sense. Bitcoin would be over, Ethereum would be over Bitcoin, Solana would be over Bitcoin. Um, a lot of these coins would be over Bitcoin. What about Hedera, right? What about near protocols, some of these AI protocols? What about internet computer? There's so many cryptocurrencies that are technologically more advanced than Bitcoin. People will say, well, people trust Bitcoin. It's the most trusted crypto. That's why. But I don't care about that. I'm just talking about technology, right? It's not great technology. It's very outdated technology. And the whole layer two to replace, layer two on top of layer one, whatever, lipstick on a pig is not. It's not going to convince me, right? I think. But what is the incentive in buying Bitcoin when it's up 125 million%, right? What is the incentive? Like, do you think it will go 10x, hit $1 million? I don't see it hitting $1 million until at least 2040 when the final Bitcoin is minted. And I think that even if Bitcoin goes to 500,000, I mean, that's what, a 8x return. I mean, is that worth the risk? Berkshire Hathaway, comparatively, all-time investment is $242,920. And even over the past couple of years, right? This is if the Berkshire Hathaway Class A stock, right? The highest price is 704,000. But it's just, I think, one of the safest assets. I mean, and can you trust Berkshire Hathaway? Because Berkshire Hathaway's had their cases of fraud, right? Like, has Berkshire Hathaway ever been accused of fraud? Like, this is the most reputable company in the world. They've had many accusations of fraud, of mismanagement, and just like Bernie Madoff did. There's no company that's perfect, and when you even have the most reputable companies, right? I would much rather invest in Berkshire Hathaway with this historical, safety. I mean, they're regulated. It's not like crypto, which is unregulated. And I know people call me, "Oh, you rather invest in Berkshire Hathaway at these prices," but it's had steady, great returns, and it can't just go to zero overnight, can it? I mean, I don't think so, right? Um, I don't believe Berkshire Hathaway's grift, even though they have their history of fraud. But anything can be grift. Bernie Madoff was a massive grift, and nobody believed that at the time in 2009. Everyone believed that that was the most, the safest, most reputable, company in the world. And what happened to Bernie Madoff? Right? It's so much easier to scam somebody than to convince them they are being scammed. And I think a lot of people have bought into Bitcoin now after 16 years. Oh, it's the most trusted crypto. No, it could go to zero, okay? And it can be very much a grift because it's not retail driven, just like every crypto, right? It's probably the most trusted, respected crypto, but I think you have to be really careful in buying into any kind of notion or narrative. That's what the whales want you to believe in. I don't see the upside in Bitcoin today, compared to many other like altcoins or just like investments in stock or S&P 500, right? That just is not going to go to zero in a couple days, like any crypto can, right? So in conclusion, I don't know if Bitcoin is a grift or not, right? But I think there are a lot of very questionable things going on with Bitcoin technology. Um, it really comes down to what this institutional unit views Bitcoin, just like what the Americans view. I say if all Americans collectively lose faith in the U.S. dollar, there goes the U.S. dollar. Um, but it's scarier with Bitcoin because it's just one institutional unit. It doesn't require 400 million Americans to all collectively agree, right? Um, that institutional unit continues to ban Bitcoin, right? That's a huge problem, a huge red flag. There's a lot of red flags. It's China, right? So that's pretty much my video. I'm not trying to convince you of any one way, but just to keep in mind, to keep in you know question everything, right? And anything can go wrong. Bitcoin can go wrong. Bitcoin could collapse.